Good morning.
Morning.
It's fun to see so many people in one place. The only problem I have is that some of you are not sitting in your normal seats. Kind of throws things off for me, but welcome. Glad you joined us here, and if you're joining us online, welcome there too. You're always welcome, and so that's exciting. We're moving through the book of Ecclesiastes, and today's bottom line is that even though there are exceptions to wisdom, pursuing God and living a life of wisdom is still worthwhile. You know, the simplistic Proverbs do this, you get that? Well, Ecclesiastes just blows that up, right? And today we're going to get really into the weeds of, but wait, that didn't work. And so we're going to still see that a life of wisdom, pulling God into the picture, is still where we need to be. So, Ryan, do you have those pictures of the streaming thing? Okay, so the past month or 2 months, whatever, we have been all over the place, and I appreciate your flexibility. So there's Ryan setting stuff up. You can just cycle through these pictures. You know, we were meeting in the youth room for a while and moving things around. Worship team is moving things around. That was kind of fun. And then we had the blue scene and standing on a table. If you didn't notice that, you're like, why is his head so close to the ceiling? Anyway. And so yeah, we just tried a bunch of different things, and we just really appreciate your flexibility as we tried to meet the needs of a church dispersed. And so a lot of work continues to go into that, right? So anyway, that's kind of fun. So thanks for being flexible around that. Now, if you're just joining us, I want to give you a quick brief overview. The book of Ecclesiastes on first read is a bit dark and dreary, and you can stumble if you don't understand what's going on. And so remember, for those of you that have been with us, you remember this, that Ecclesiastes, it's not the confession of a king in crisis. It's a skillful argument that you will not find meaning and purpose outside of God. That's what he means by under the sun. Good luck with that. And he just kind of walks through. And so remember, to prove his argument that life without God equals meaningless and futility, he adopts the secularist philosophy and says, okay, let's just assume that there's no God and take a run at it and see where we get. And that's what most of this book is doing. So chapters 1 and 2, we saw that rather than look for meaning and pleasures, party, and possessions, we need to look at God, because he says, for who can enjoy life without God? Chapter 3, rather than try to control the times and seasons that just bombard us, again, we trust him, we fear God. In chapters 4 and 5, last week, we saw that rather than looking for meaning through wealth, we are to take, remember, one handful, be content with that, instead of 2 handfuls striving after the wind. Chapter 6 continues his argument about wealth, the inability of wealth to produce lasting meaning. And then here we go to chapter 7 today. And chapter 6:12, though, if you have a Bible, turn over to Ecclesiastes. If you find Psalms or Proverbs, just go to the right. You'll bump into it. So Ecclesiastes 6:12 kind of asks a question, and it sets up what he's doing here in chapter 7. So here's 6:12. For who knows what is good for man, while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? So this is interesting, because up to now, Solomon, the author, it has been reflecting and arguing and observing. And now he makes a pretty hard shift, and he starts going into Proverbs. Not the book of Proverbs, but he starts to write Proverbs. He just starts to say things, some of his observations, and better is this, and the wise do that. So you'll notice kind of a shift here that's going on, all right? His message is the same, all right? The message is still the same. In spite of all the futility and all the frustrations, we still want to pursue God and live a life of wisdom. But I can't ignore the tension between the book of Proverbs and the simple formula of Proverbs. If you do A, you get B. And the book of Ecclesiastes. I did A, I don't get B. Okay, and so we really have to dig into that. But that, as I read commentaries, there's a handful of scholars that they don't get it. And they look at Ecclesiastes and they despair, and they're trying to figure it out. And it's just like, ugh. That's kind of heavy, all right? So, but here, this has been tragic this past couple weeks, what's going on in our nation, and it really fits right here. Look at this. Proverbs 10:6 says, blessings are on the head of the righteous, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Well, Ecclesiastes 8 says, there's something else that's meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous get what the wicked deserve. So Proverbs, simplistic Proverbs says, the righteous get blessings. And Ecclesiastes says, sometimes the righteous don't get blessings. They get actually what the wicked deserve. And you see that in our nation. You know, the whole thing with George Floyd and the injustice and the explosion of interest and concern, an appropriate explosion of interest and concern, is just raising these issues. And so it reminds us, again, remember Proverbs, simple formula, but Proverbs is written to an immature audience. Ecclesiastes is written to a mature audience willing to wrestle with these deep, dark questions. Why do the righteous suffer? Where is God when things blow up? And we may see glimpses of justice on this earth, but it's never going to be fully fixed on this earth. We walk through with pain. All of us here, if we had coffee with one-on-one with everybody in the room, we would have, here's my story, here's the pain I currently bear. And it's just not what I thought it would be, and this isn't turning out, and I wish that ever happened. If I could only go back in time. And we all have those stories. And my point is that the point of life is not to try to eradicate all pain. The point is to find redemption and renewal in Jesus. Now, Jesus restores and redeems, and I'm so amazed that he can restore and redeem our pain and our agony. He doesn't completely make it disappear. But we have a story of being redeemed and renewed, and that's what we see here, all right? So the key difference here goes back to the purpose of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. I alluded to this already, but Proverbs is short, pithy sayings, makes life seem real simple because it's written to a young, immature person. In fact, not now, but some other time, go to your Bible. The first phrase of every verse of the first 9 chapters says the same thing. My son, blah, 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 blah. My son. So you're addressing someone who's young and immature. This is where you start figuring life out. Read Proverbs. Okay, and then you graduate to Ecclesiastes because you're like, teacher, dad, it didn't work. Right? We know the verse, train up a child the way he should go. When he's old, he won't depart from it. Nah. It's a general observation. Now, Proverbs are general observations. Most of the time it does work. But we all have exceptions, okay? Now here's the fun thing. If we didn't have Ecclesiastes in the Bible, think what that would do to our theology. We would overread Proverbs. We would optimistically leverage Proverbs. We would go to God and twist his arm behind his back and say, I got a verse here. I got my rights. You better. Bible says. So Ecclesiastes kind of causes us to respectfully back up and go, yeah, most of the time, if you train up a child in the way, that's how it works. But the child grows up and adopts his own choices and carries the consequences of it. So you see what I'm saying there? Okay. Proverbs are still super worth, because that is how it normally works. But don't melt down when you see one exception. All right. Okay, so life in Ecclesiastes is complex. You don't just find a simple formula, follow it, and everything's done. Jesus makes all things new in the midst of a complex life when we're carrying burdens. He redeems and makes all things new. So another theme that I kind of think about all the time, it shows up here, is that Jesus is in the middle of things. Have you been praying for anything for years and years and years and you want it to be over? Right? Well, it just occurs to me that Ecclesiastes is very much in the middle of unsolved tensions and pain. And that's where most of us live most of our lives. There's always some unsolved issue. And so we turn to God with our pain, and he redeems it. So let's go to the next slide or two here. I might have got, yeah, perfect, okay. This is chapter 12, the end of the book, so this is where all this stuff is going. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. These are words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads. They prompt us, and like nails firmly fixed, they anchor us, are the collected sayings given by one shepherd, by God. So that's where he's going. And so what follows here in chapter 7, words of truth. They anchor us in a life that's in flux, in a life that people search for meaning. And like the goads, they prompt us to move in a different direction. All right? So let's read chapter 7, first 4 verses. Ecclesiastes 7, first 4 verses. A good name is better than precious ointment. The day of death, better than the day of birth. Okay, right away we have some questions. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Okay, so we'll stop there, first 4 verses, and we'll dig into that. Again, if God is not in the picture for you, even if you have a good reputation, you're still going to die. Even if you do have a good reputation, you're still going to die. That's his point, all right? So I want to be clear here. Verse 1, the day of death, it's not your death that the text is talking about. It's talking about someone else's death, because it goes on to explain you're at the house of mourning for someone else who died, and you're dealing with it. So we are at a funeral here in verse 1. And I don't know about you, but man, every time I'm at a funeral, it's just a great checkup. Because, typically, things are beeping. We got to go schedule 2:30 this. Did you do that? Oh, I forgot you did that. Busy. You go to a funeral and you're like, that will be me someday. What am I living for? How am I doing? You ever think those thoughts? We rarely do, probably unless you're at a funeral. You're on track? That's a great question. So that's what he's saying. The day of death is better than the day of birth. So he's kind of comparing a funeral to a new baby. Now, the funeral prompts us, goads us to move in the direction of contemplating the meaning of life. Why am I here? What's going on? A new baby is great. We're excited about that. But you don't start launching into great, deep questions holding a baby saying, what did you do? I mean, nothing wrong with the new baby. He's just saying that everyone is going to die, and the wise person considers this and thinks about where they're at, thinks about the meaning of life. All right, next verse here. Yeah, I think did I have Psalm 90 up there? Yeah, there we go. Psalm 90. So teach us to number our days that we may get a heart of wisdom. So we really need to consider, and that's what funerals will do. We need to consider, I'm not going to live forever, so I have a limited time. How am I going to leverage that, invest that? What's important, and where am I going to go? Okay? All right. So in verse 2, he goes on, the house of mourning. Better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, because this is the end of all mankind. We all are going to die someday, so you probably want to figure out how to live. That's what he's saying. If we face the reality of our coming death, we're probably going to make life changes. Again, you go to a funeral, the chances of you adjusting your life are greater attending a funeral than attending a baby shower. That's the point here, okay? Psalm 16:11, I've mentioned this in the past. It's in many ways, Psalm 16:11 kind of summarizes the whole book of Ecclesiastes. It says this: you make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand there are pleasures forever. Just live in the presence of God. That's where joy is. That's where meaning is. That's the door to satisfying, meaningful, purposeful life. Verse 3 says, sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. Again, sorrowful situations cause us to slow down and ponder, how am I living? Where am I going? What's the grander questions? And that can lead to deeper, longer lasting satisfaction than simply happiness and parties. And that's what he gets to in verse 4. The heart of the wise, look where they hang out. They are in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools are in the house of mirth. Mirth is just gladness, satisfaction, joy, like a party, okay? So the wise person is considering the mourning that they're at the home of someone who has passed away, talking and reflecting, about the great life there. We just had a funeral in our congregation here the past week. Memories, what a great life, and how God worked through a person. So that's what's going on there. So the house of the wise, they're engaging in those kind of realities. This is the end of everybody. You're thinking about that. But the fool, they're just having a party, living just for today. Okay? Big difference. Let's go to the next one, point number 2. The reality of folly reminds us of the value of wisdom. So verse 5 says, it's better for man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. So you've got, love the contrast, right? You've got the rebuke of the wise and a song. Well, I'd rather hear a song than a rebuke any day, but it's the rebuke of the wise versus the song of the fools. And then the next verse is great because it explains it. He says, for as, which is a simile, it means it's similar. It's not the exact match, but it's similar. As, or like, the crackling of thorns under a pot, like in a fire, so is the laughter of fools. And so if you've ever had a fire and you get some gangly vines or dried thorns on it, you throw it on there, they just burn up super quick and snap and crackle and pop. Anyway, and then it's gone. You don't roast hamburgers over thorns. They just gone. That's the point here, okay? It's just like, if you hear a rebuke from the wise, you're going to stand a greater chance to entertain life-changing questions than the hollow laughter of fools that is here now and then gone in 5 minutes. So, how do you engage life, and are you allowing the painful situations of life to lead you to some pretty difficult questions? That's what this is about. Where are you looking for meaning in life? What gives you joy? What idols are we all chasing, looking for joy that we should be looking to God for? That's right here. I'm right there with you. I've got my favorite idols that, most of the time we don't talk about them and we don't list them out, but we all have things that we kind of gravitate to, a daydream about. Like I told you before, my one daydream idol is like, if I could just live in Moab, Utah and ride my mountain bike for 7 hours a day, everything would be okay. Somebody wants to go with me. But anyway, chances are probably not, because if I have problems here, and if I have problems in Moab, and if I have problems in Spain and Italy and wherever else, then I'm the problem. So I just take my junk with me, and anyway, so I'll just stay here, maybe for a couple days. But I won't move there, escaping my issues, because I can't escape my issues. Okay, back to reality. So just as he goes through here, he's talking about the heart of the wise, entertaining broad questions. The wise person faces death and asks good questions, and they make some life changes and adjustments. Then in verse 7, he kind of pulls the rug a little bit, and he says, well, surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. So even if you are wise, you're susceptible to bribery. So financial success now opens another threat to you. You can be leveraged by the cares and concerns you have with all your wealth. We see that on the news about every day, right? And so that's just something, just a heads up, if you're in this room, you are wealthy, right? I had a whole bunch of slides here, don't have time for that, but I mean, if you own a house and a car, you're the top 3% economically on people on the planet. Anyway, even if you have some debt, you have the tools to get out of that pretty quick and keep going. So the first task there is to recognize, okay, I am wealthy compared to people on the planet. And with that comes tactical care about what do I allow the wealth to do to my heart. And here it says, the bribe can get even to the wise and compromise them. I think that's fascinating. So think about Solomon. He was the blankest man who ever lived. Wisest. And yet he has hundreds of wives, thousands of concubines. He builds idols to false gods in Jerusalem. Have you ever kind of wrestled with I don't get it. Hey, teacher, I don't get it. How can he be the wisest man who ever lived? And yet I read his life and he's just, what? Okay, here's the answer. Just because you're wise today is no guarantee you will be wise tomorrow. You're wise today, you can make foolish decisions tomorrow. And if you make foolish decisions tomorrow, and you make foolish decisions Tuesday and Wednesday, you string those together, and all of a sudden, you're submitting blueprints to the city planner to build a temple of Molech in Jerusalem. Because your wife from Moab has to have it, she says. If mom ain't happy, nobody's happy. So you build the temple to Molech. Anyway, here's the bottom line. You are the sum total of many small decisions over many small days. I am the sum total. It's a bit of an exaggeration. I know God's grace comes in there, but do you see what I'm saying? That all these little decisions, they add up and they create who we are, the passions we have, the desires we have. Many small decisions over many small days. That's where Solomon went sideways. Many small decisions over many small days. I love that. Remember Oscar Wilde, the guy we had a couple weeks ago? He was that super famous, brilliant guy in London and wrote, they said he was next to Shakespeare, the best writer they ever had. He said this. He just dove headfirst into a life of sensuality. I ceased to be lord over myself. I was no longer captive of my soul, and I did not know it. I allowed pleasure to dominate me. Now listen to this, what he says. I forgot that every little action of the common day makes or unmakes character, and that therefore what one has done in the secret chamber, one has someday to cry aloud on the housetop. And so that was after his life crashed and burned. I think it'd be wise for me to look at his life and say, how can it not end up there? Right? And this is the spirit of Ecclesiastes. If we live without God, there's an inevitable path to meaningless and despair. And if you live with God, there's a life of purpose and meaning. That's what he's talking about. Okay. Talking about wealth, I also had a prof in seminary that said something, and it's one of those things, have you ever heard something and you just know I don't have to memorize that, it's going to be with me forever because it's just either audacious or so clear or just so kind of confusing? He said this, and I've never forgotten it. I fear prosperity more than bad theology. And I'm a seminary student, and I'm like, whoa, no, bad theology is like the worst. He's like, no, prosperity is worse because of all it does to the heart, and all it does to the interpretive lens, the hermeneutic, and all it does to the life, all it does to the relationships, all it does to the values and decisions, and it just went on and on and on. And I've been thinking about that for like 30 years now. And I'm like, I think I see what he's saying. Prosperity is a threat, and that's what verse 7 says. Bribery and prosperity can be a chink in the armor of the wise. All right, so let's go to the next one, number 3. The reality of God reminds us to pursue wisdom and trust Him, even though there's exceptions to wisdom. Even though I don't always get what the formula says, we still are called to live a life of wisdom and pursue God. Because chapter 12 is very clear. We will be judged. We will be evaluated by what we do. Ultimate condemnation is taken care of, but our report card, our evaluation, that's still future. And this is where he's going in chapter 12. So, marching through a bunch of these proverbs here. Verse 8, a life of wisdom is a life of patience. Better in the end of a thing than its beginning, and better the patient in spirit than the proud in spirit. Okay, class time, put on your thinking cap. Look at verse 8. What does he compare the end with? Better is the end than the beginning. That makes sense. Okay, the next thing. What does he compare the patient with? The patient person. Pride. Now, I'm reading this going, well, wait a minute. I mean, if you're going to compare and contrast patience, you're looking for like the impatient person. So I'm asking myself, well, what's the link between impatience and pride? And I think it's this, that if you're impatient, it's as though you're saying this. No, just be quiet. You have nothing to tell me. I don't need any more information. I know everything I need to know to make this decision. Let's go, go, go. That's pride. I'm kind of an impatient person. I read this, I'm like, let's move on. You get what I'm saying? So I just thought that was amazing. Better is the patient in spirit than the proud in spirit. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it on the way home. Metaphorically. All right? That means to think about it, all right, anyway. In case you don't know what's going on. All right. So that's what's going on there. And then he goes to verse 9. He's got a couple things. Don't do this. Verse 9, don't be quick in your spirit to become angry. Anger lodges in the heart of fools. We know this from the book of James. It tells us to be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Proverbs 12:16 says, a fool's anger is known at once. Some people, when they're tripped, you just know it. The wise person conceals their anger. They probably go for a run later, but they conceal it in the moment, right? You got to be skillful about how you unpack that and all that. So, contentment, verse 10. A life of wisdom is a life of contentment. Say not, why were the former days better than these? It's not from wisdom, you ask this. Run around complaining, and yesterday was always so much better. Now, yesterday may have been better, but you don't just have to live there, right? It seems like the good old days are a combination of a bad memory and a good imagination, right? Because we talked about this a week or two ago, like on hard seasons of life, maybe a difficult vacation, you look back on it, it kind of gets better and better and better. You forget all the negative stuff. And this was just a complete meltdown, and that's all I remember. But anyway, all right? Okay. So, don't be quick to become angry. Don't complain about the good old days. The life of the wise walks down the path of patience, humility, and being slow to anger. The life of fools, they're impatient, they're quick to anger, and they're prideful. And then advantage. The life of wisdom is a life of advantage. Verses 11 and 12. Wisdom is good with an inheritance. An advantage to those who see the sun. Now, you know me, I've said this before. It's good to have several different translations of the Bible. This is a classic example of what you benefit from by doing that. You kind of compare to see what's going on. And one translation says here, wisdom is as good as inheritance. It's not what it's talking about. It's not saying, oh, you've got inheritance and wisdom is as good as that. That's not the meaning. The meaning is precisely this. Wisdom, like an inheritance, is a good thing. Or better, here it says wisdom along with an inheritance. So you have an inheritance, and when you have wisdom with that inheritance, that is good. Imagine an inheritance with no wisdom. In fact, I might want the phone number of a person who has an inheritance with no wisdom. Because I want to move this iceberg from the north down to Bolivia to help the farmers. Anyway, that's a joke, but probably won't get any money. Okay, so when accompanied by wisdom, inheritance is a good thing. Verse 12, the protection of wisdom is like, again, there's a simile, it's like the protection of money. And the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. So a lot of things going on in this verse. The idea is to be in the shadow of wisdom is to also be in the shadow of money. So there's this image of the hot sun, kind of like today, yesterday, and wisdom and money provide a bit of an umbrella. They protect you from that blazing heat. It's ironic because he's just said in chapter 6, verse 12, who knows what is good for man while he lives on this earth, in which he passes like a shadow. So he's got the image of this shadow, like your life is just a shadow, and it's gone. But then here he's talking about how money and wisdom provide a shadow, a shade for you. And so you've got this tension through the whole book. It's like, well, yeah, wisdom, oh yeah, you'll live long and the righteous are blessed, except when they're not. And then here, oh yeah, your wisdom is a shadow from the hot blazing sun, and yet your life is just like a quick shadow, and it's meaningless. So you've got these intentional contradictions on purpose, and that is to provide our avenue towards seeking meaning through God and not just trying to figure it out here. All right? So I think that's kind of fascinating. Shade. How does money provide shade? It insulates, it protects, and it provides. If you have money, you're insulated from certain pressures and threats. You're protected. Wisdom does the same thing. Wisdom insulates you. I'm not going to go there at that time of day. Well, you're protected. It provides for you. You see how things work and you make decisions. So he's drawing that comparison. But the bottom line is that it's not a guarantee. There are exceptions to wisdom. And his point is, even though there's exceptions to wisdom, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Pursue God. Remember, we will be judged for what we do, so we still are called to a life of wisdom. We're only going to find meaning when we find life in God. Verse 13, trusting. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he's been crooked? And verse 14, in the day of prosperity be joyful. Now this is where he kind of wraps it all up. In the day of prosperity be joyful. In the day of adversity consider. God has made one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. You remember chapter 3, there are times and seasons that just come to us. I can't control what's going to come to me this afternoon. Can you? We can set some things up. I can put up my Outlook calendar. It doesn't guarantee it's going to happen. There was once a prophet at school that left his Outlook login on come in the classroom, and his calendar was still up there because he had logged out. And so I picked a date like in 3 months down the road on his Outlook calendar. I put a whole bunch of stuff like wash John Holmes' car, take John Holmes out for lunch. You know what I mean? Anyway, just for fun. But that didn't mean it was going to happen. So I can't control what is going to happen, nor can you. So, verse 14, and it says very clearly here, we don't know what we're going to encounter tomorrow. It could be, what does he say? Prosperity, or it could be adversity. The challenge here is, will you say yes to the future that God has for you before it comes? Can you say, Lord Jesus, what you have for me tomorrow, as I seek you, submit to you, walk in wisdom, I say yes to that. That's a life of faith. We're called to a life of trusting, okay? He has made one as well as the other so that we won't find out what's after him. We don't know what's connected, what's coming. So he says wisdom is worth following even though there are exceptions. So when you have a verse from Proverbs and you see an exception, don't throw your Bible out the window and stop pursuing God. We live in a broken world. We get glimpses of justice, but until Jesus comes and reigns himself, it's never going to be perfect. All right? So thankfully, he redeems and restores. But he's in the middle of that, and it will take a while. Right? So, questions. Are you open to listening to the rebuke of wisdom? Someone in your life, can they speak to you and rebuke you? Do you prefer that than the shallow song of fools? Are you contemplating the brevity of life? Do you think about where you're going, and do you number your days? Do you consider your days before you get too old and have regrets? So these are important questions. So, Romans 8:28, love this verse. We know that all things work together. For those who love God, all things work together for good. Now, sometimes people get this verse and they're like, they put the comfort lens on that. And they say, I got a verse. I'm going to be comfortable and rich because God says everything's good. Well, this is his kingdom purposes. And in the context here, he's talking about conformity to the image of his son. So just remember that. That's good. Good is being conformed to the image of his son, not just getting a boat and a cabin. All right? Anyway. All right. So, in conclusion, no one can discover what the future holds. There are exceptions to wisdom, but in spite of those exceptions, God is good. He loves us. He died for us. He desperately wants a relationship with us, and He's reaching out to us. Will you pursue Him even though there are exceptions to wisdom, even though something may have disappointed you in life? Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that you are faithful and true. We just look at the world we live in and we see we need you. We do not have justice, love, forgiveness, peace, and meaning on this planet. Only you can give that to us. And I pray that as we live in a fallen, broken world, among other, ourselves included, fallen, broken people, we would not despair, but that you would be our hope. You would be the one that we look to redeem and restore. And may you redeem and restore even our own thoughts and attitudes this week as we look at what you would have us do and how you would have us interact with those around us. Amen.